Hey people, so after years and years and literal years of people telling me that I should read the Six of Crows duology and that I would absolutely love it, I finally actually read it a few weeks ago. I had two 10-hour train journeys that week, and I basically read all of book one on the first one and most of book two on the second, and then finished it the minute I got home. And essentially, yeah, everyone who told me it was utterly fantastic was 100% right. I adore these books. They are so good. I loved every character. The plot was so detailed and twisting and complex, and I love heist books as well. And the descriptions were all really vivid. It was just amazing. Then, when I got back, I also watched the entire Netflix show back to back in about 3 days, which was probably not good for my schedule. And whilst obviously the story wasn't as strong, I still really enjoyed all the characters, and it kind of got me thinking, what if I designed my own versions of the characters based on the books? So that's what this video is. As I've said in a couple of previous videos, I am sorry if the audio quality is really awful today. I still haven't really got my audio setup worked out. Basically, my microphone hasn't worked for about half a year, and I should really do something about it. But timing and energy. So, you know, I hope you enjoy the video anyway. Also just wanted to add, in case it wasn't painfully obvious, there will be some mild spoilers for both Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom in this video because I'm going to be talking about the events of the book and how they shaped the character designs. There shouldn't be any spoilers for the show if you're worried about that, but if you don't want to come across any book spoilers at all, might not be the video for you. So I'm starting with Kaz, which you probably could have guessed, and Kaz was probably one of the most difficult ones because the Kaz in the show is almost exactly how I imagined him, particularly with the dress sense and costuming, but I gave it a shot anyway. In fact, I specifically chose to start with his face instead, because the nice thing about doing book character designs is I'm not tied to trying to make it look like a real person who exists. And so I gave him a nice, sharp, square jaw to kind of give that cutting ruthlessness vibe that he has going on, and then also balanced it with these little eye bags underneath his eyes because there is no way this man is not completely sleep deprived. Kaz dresses in all black in the books, and this is because he's specifically trying to mock the Murchers who do the same. It's not actually just because he's emo. He is, though, a dramatic little bastard. So I decided to give him these big winged collars on both his coat and his shirt to kind of emphasize that and also just kind of make him more dangerous and like spiky looking. And Kaz is all about the illusion of being in control, so I knew I wanted to dress him in such a way that kind of projected the illusion that he probably wants to project to everyone else. And as such, I decided he needed this big square coat that would kind of swamp him in darkness, but also kind of make him seem broader than he was and make his frame seem really kind of robust and stable. Even though he's, a 17-year-old kid with severe trauma, he is not at all stable. I also added little feather details across his clothes and a little crow-shaped pin to his tie because, once again, he's pretty dramatic and I kind of thought that he would probably be the sort of person to invest in those details. He's also one of the only characters in this book series that actually has any money because all of the other kids have not been around that long and are broke. And so I feel like this is the sort of thing that Kaz might invest in. Finally, I added a little knee brace to support his leg. His leg injury was obviously the result of a bad break that never healed properly, so a knee brace probably wouldn't help him that much unless his kneecap also broke in that fall. But I thought it was a fun little detail to kind of draw attention to anyway. I also was going to give him a hat, because in the book specifically, Inej brings him a hat, and he mentions it in one of his very sweet little internal monologues that he has about her. So I thought it'd be a super fun detail to add, but I was just so happy with how his hair turned out that I couldn't bear to then put a hat on him and hide it. For colours, obviously Kaz mostly wears black. However, rather than going 100% black, I decided to add some dark greys and silvers into his outfit as well, just to try and like break up his silhouette and the shapes of his body a bit more, so that he wasn't just kind of an ominous smudge against the background. I also added some pinstripes to his trousers to kind of give him a more businessy look, and also some extra texture to the waistcoat to just give him a bit more visual interest. And of course, the black gloves to finish off the look. So moving on to Inej, and she's actually the character that started all this because whilst I did adore the show designs, one thing that really stuck out to me was Inej is wearing boots. Because in the books, actually, the three sort of core members of the Crows all have a fabricator-made tool that helps them do their jobs. Kaz has his cane, Jesper has his pearl-handled revolvers, and Inej has a pair of custom-made rubber-soled slippers that she uses to help climb, that are actually a key element to the plot in the Six of Crows book during the Ice Court heist. And whilst I think Amita Suman looked absolutely fantastic in the boots that Inej wears in the show, I think the show design demonstrates that they see her more as the Wraith than they do as a spider, which is reflected in the writing of the show as well, I feel. But Inej is meant to be Kaz's spider, as well as a child raised as an acrobat. And so in my design, I've made her compact, she's muscular, and I've tried to make sure that her clothes are practical and pretty form fitting, which might seem kind of counterintuitive given her history. But if she's going to be climbing up and down buildings all day, she doesn't want long, loose sleeves or coats that can get caught in the brickwork or loose nails. And whilst flowy fabric might feel very indicative of a wraith like character, it would actually just be so impractical for someone who has to have careful control of her movements at all times. For a similar reason, I also thought that having her hair pinned back quite tightly would be a good idea. It's probably slightly controversial not to give her the iconic braid that everybody draws her with all the time, but when I read about her hair being in a twist at the back of her head, I pictured something a little bit more like what I've drawn here. Not to mention, nobody wants to risk someone grabbing their hair in the middle of a knife fight, and I think that would go double for Inej. Deliberate for a while over the fastenings on Inej's shoes because I feel a little bit like the ballet slipper thing is kind of overdone. Not to mention feeling kind of unnecessarily feminine for no real reason, and it's always something they put on girl characters who are cool, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. But regular laces just didn't look quite right, and in a world with no elastic or Velcro, I figured that fabric ties, similar to those on ballet slippers, were actually still a pretty good choice. I also gave her some little reinforced padding on the knees and the shoulders, kind of reminiscent of the padding that I imagine Jesper makes for her in the books before her final fight. A Ghafa never falls, but it's always good to be prepared just in case, you know? That final fight, I am actually currently working on an animatic that kind of shows Inej versus Dunyasha, her final fight on the cathedral roof, and I'm storyboarding it at the minute, so it's not done just yet. I had to shuffle this video forwards for reasons, but when it is done, if you want to check that out, I'm really excited about it, and I think it's hopefully going to look really cool. I would also like to apologise because I accidentally did most of the line art for Inej without remembering to hit record on my computer. So apologies for that, but it really didn't seem worth going back and redoing it all whilst recording when there are so many characters to get through. And like I said, I moved this video forwards. I was on a bit of a time crunch to finish it because I found out like 2 days ago that the Witcher Season 4 trailer might be coming out sometime in the next week or two. And I wanted to clear up space in my schedule and on my computer to make a video about that because I've been waiting for it for quite a while. But for colours for Inej, I went with pretty dark tones again. I've got a whole ramble about Barrel Flash and its vividness and how bright and colourful it should be. Inej is a character whose main job is to travel around unseen, and while she's obviously capable of moving silently and going unnoticed whilst decked out in bright colours and with literal bells attached to her feet, I can't imagine doing that actually makes her job any easier, and so I thought darker, more muted colours probably make her job easier. That said, she's not Kaz, so she can have a little bit of colour, and I decided to add that mostly on her scarf and hood, but also after struggling through balancing another all black and grey character design, I also decided to let her have some dark blue, kind of indigo coloured trousers to break up the colours a little bit more, and I think the blue not only suits her, but it's a nice subtle shift away from the purple silks that she would have worn at the menagerie, and also kind of makes her whole outfit sort of reminiscent of the night sky, which I quite like. Finally, I put some subtle floral details on the waistcoat as well, just to kind of tie it in and give the outfit a little bit more texture. I'm really, really happy with my Inej design. I like her. I think she's one of the coolest looking ones of the lot. So, yeah. Next, we have Jesper, and I am not gonna lie, Jesper is probably my favourite Six of Crows character. I adore this man, and now I have a lovely new addition to my collection of deeply insecure bisexual characters who hide behind wit and humour and are incredibly good at their specific skill set but often get overlooked by their peers. It's a weird niche, but I'm collecting them like Pokemon, I swear. Jesper is tall and lanky to the extent that despite growing up on a farm, half the characters still think he's a beanpole and actually couldn't do any heavy lifting if they really asked him to, and I wanted to emphasize that. So, as much as I adore the skirt he wears in the show, I decided that trousers would be slightly better for showing off that long legged silhouette. That said, I did decide to crop the trousers to show off some pretty tall combat style boots I've put him in, partly because it looked cool, but also to kind of help further that long legged illusion. But I did compensate for the lack of the lovely genderqueer skirt by giving him a little gay earring to balance it back out a bit, so it's all good. I also decided to give Jesper a cropped jacket rather than the longer kind of dramatic coat that he sometimes has, because I wanted to be able to show off that gun belt of his even better. Jesper's guns are so integral to his character and also just really important to him personally, so making them really clear and having them on display felt like an obvious choice. Now, you can tell I did all the colouring on the same day, and I really wasn't with it because I also did all of the colouring for Jesper without hitting record. I was having a day of it, which was very stupid of me. However, at the rate I was going, I wasn't going to have a video if I didn't redo anything, so I did redo the colour on camera for you guys, but I decided to leave the shading and the highlights as I'd already done them rather than recreating them from scratch because shading's hard and difficult. But yeah, I am really sorry for the choppiness of this video. I forgot how to record things. It's been a while. Now, for Jesper, I went all out on the barrel flash. He has some very fun outfits in the show, but I distinctly remember reading about him in like lime green trousers and a yellow waistcoat in the books, and it was just such a vivid and slightly horrifying image that I just had to do it here. Le Bardugo describes the barrel so wonderfully, and one of the key elements of it is how colourful it is. The Murchers and the upstanding folk wear black like Kaz, but the barrel folks are bright and colourful and garish, and I felt like Jesper was the perfect character to encapsulate this in. It's horrible and ugly, but it's also just so full of life, and I think that kind of style fits Jesper really well. I also decided when colouring to give Jesper his grey eyes from the books. I'm not really a person who gets bothered by characters' eye colours or hair colour not quite matching when they cast live action versions of things. I'd much rather they just had the right actor in the role and the story is told well. And I've been in fandoms where the people who mostly complain about really odd specific things like eye colours tend to just be complaining because they've decided they don't like the actor, or in some fandoms just because they're being plain old racist, which sucks. However, these are book character designs that I'm doing right now, and so that means that I do have free reign to do whatever eye colours I want, and I can kind of take things straight from the book, which is nice. But we're now going to move on to Nina. In the Crooked Kingdom book, Kaz actually describes Nina and Metthias as the two biggest members of the crew, physically speaking. And I knew I wanted to make sure, therefore, that Nina was both taller and kind of curvier so that she could be shorter than Jesper, but still have a much larger physical presence. For costuming, I was trying to balance the teenage girl who loves waffles and often wears more suggestive dresses with the ex soldier who is definitely not pulling off heists or fighting battles in a multi layered skirt. As such, I decided to give her that classic kind of corsety top that often goes with dresses, inspired roughly by the one she wears in the show, but paired it with some more slightly practical trousers and taller boots that she could run around in more easily. I did want to call back to the dress silhouette, however, so I gave her this long coat. There's a line in Crooked Kingdom where Nina has to change back into her regular clothes for the auction after having been wearing the kefta gifted to her by the Grisha Triumvirate. And she talks about putting the coat back on as being kind of comforting compared to the kefta, which has all of its expectations. And I think it says a lot about her character slowly shifting away from that soldier that she was. But I also just thought the coat would be a nice little detail for that silhouette reason. For Nina's colours, though, I immediately knew I wanted red. Not only is it the colour of the Korporalki kefta, but I also just think it really fits Nina's bold, warm personality quite well. Unlike the previous three characters, however, Nina doesn't really belong to the barrel. She's lived there and worked there as part of the dregs for about a year before the Ice Court heist, but she never really intended to stay longer than the time it took to free Matthias. And so I softened the red with some more neutral tones because I couldn't really see her embracing barrel life in the same way someone like Jesper might have. I did feel like her coat should have something special to it though, rather than just being a plain kind of brownish trench coat, so I brought some of the red back in with a sort of burgundy colour. I do realise that I've basically just given her Jaskia's coat from The Witcher, but she's kind of rocking it, so I'm not even mad. So next we have Matthias, and for him, I really wanted to try and emphasise that just being physically strong and being a fighter character doesn't necessarily mean having a Dorito triangle physique and six-pack abs. He's Fjerdan and grew up in the extreme cold, so I think it makes sense for him to be bigger, but to also have extra layers of softness to kind of keep him warm, that he would be kind of rounder and cozier. Of course, he may have potentially lost some of that and slimmed down a bit during his time in Hellgate, but I really liked it as a basis for the character, so I stuck with it despite it possibly pushing the limits of the realism a little bit. I then had to tackle his clothing, which gave me many problems. Do I dress him super warmly because he's Fjerdan and he lives in cold environments so he needs extra furs, or with barely any layers at all because he's used to so much colder temperatures than Ketterdam that it doesn't bother him? And then I remembered Matthias's excitement at seeing Nina in a knitted jumper and how like knitted clothes are apparently a staple of kind of like Fjerdan culture, and remembered also that he's a big softie. And so I went fully down that route and gave him a cozy turtleneck and some fairly loose trousers that I could tuck into his little boots so that he kind of is almost somehow swamped by his clothes despite how tall and large framed he is. And so he's got that very much that gentle giant kind of vibe to him. When doing the colours for Matthias, I thought it would be really cute to give him a slightly stronger blush than lots of the other characters have, to try and give that impression of him being out in the cold and having like a cold nose. And I just think it turned out so cute, and I'm really glad I included that detail. He's also the only one of the boys who I gave any stubble to, since when they first meet him in Hellgate and they free him, he has a whole beard, which he presumably would have shaved off at a later point, given that he didn't feel like he'd earned it yet. But it does prove that despite the fact that they are all like fairly young teenagers, Matthias at least can grow a beard. For his color scheme, I mostly used blues, especially that kind of icy blue for the knitted jumper, because I felt it was appropriate, what with him being Fjerdan, to kind of tie back into the main colors. He's slowly escaping from the cult, but there's still obviously a great love of where he's from and his country, and also it matches his eyes. I then paired that with a much darker blue coat just to kind of give a bit of contrast and also to kind of make sure that his entire color scheme wasn't too pale. Matthias is actually one of the other designs that I'm really happy with. I think I got the balance really good on this, and I thought he was going to be really difficult because he was the only one going in that I didn't have any sort of strong opinions about what I wanted to do with him. So the way he turned out is something I'm actually really happy with. Our next character is Wylan, and for him, I wanted him to look super scruffy and out of place and altogether just a bit mismatched. Excluding Matthias, who's been locked up in Hellgate the entire time, Wylan is the newest to the barrel, having only arrived 6 months before the story began, with literally nothing to his name except a broken flute and a folder of papers with nothing written on them. He spent at least one of those months working in a highly toxic tannery for pennies, and even after Kaz recruited him, the general consensus among the dregs, as stated by Jesper in the first book, is that Wylan is like a mid demo man at most, and the dregs definitely have other options who probably get paid more. In other words, Wylan is likely skint broke. So everything he wears is going to be stolen or borrowed from the people around him or what scraps he can find abandoned by others. He's a small kid, so likely none of it fits properly. Although I do imagine a merchant's son likely prioritizes warmth over anything else, so I've given him a snuggly jumper to go under the waistcoat to kind of add those extra layers. He's not used to sleeping somewhere that doesn't have proper insulation. For colours, I leant back into that borrowed and cobbled together look again with a teal jumper and then like a mustard waistcoat, which doesn't quite clash, but definitely looks like a bit of a random choice that you probably only made because those were the two items of clothing you could find. I did afterwards realise that it meant he was a little bit Perry the Platypus coded by mistake. But actually, I see no issue with this, and I'm totally on board with this vibe. I also realised that unlike Matthias and Nina and Kaz and Inej, Jesper and Wylan really do not match or look particularly cohesive as a pair of characters stood next to each other now that I've designed them, mostly because of the colour palettes. But you know what? I feel like it kind of suits them given they spend a good two-thirds of the book teasing each other and mocking each other, and both have fairly chaotic personalities and hobbies, and obviously the two of them are the most kind of indicative of the Barrel Flash because at the end of the books, the only characters who remain in Ketterdam and in the Barrel are Kaz, Wylan, and Jesper. Admittedly, Wylan probably goes back to wearing more mature appropriate clothes at the time, but I like to imagine he's still got a few fun pieces in the back of his wardrobe. My only major concern with my Wylan design, and it's probably why he's the one I'm least happy with, is I think I made him look just a little bit too young. I'm wondering if it's the hair that's done it, or but it might just be also because he's quite short. But on the whole, I'm kind of happy with it, so I think it's alright. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's called Six of Crows, not Seven of Crows. But damn it, I wanted to draw Kuwei Yul-Bo anyway. Not only is this kid around for the whole of Crooked Kingdom, and so is kind of an honorary member of the group anyway, but Wylan also shares his face for like half the story, so I thought it would be interesting to give him a design too. Which, speaking of, his beef with Wylan will never not be hilarious to me. Like, yeah, he stole your face, and his dad values you more than he values his own son, but what are the two of you mad about? You like the same boy. I mean, come on. It's stuff like this that really makes you remember that they are just a bunch of kids desperately in need of some adult supervision. Anyway, like Wylan, Kuwei is mostly in borrowed clothes because, well, he's the hostage. I suppose theoretically he might have spent all of Crooked Kingdom in his prison clothes, but that's boring. What's especially funny to me is that most of his things are likely borrowed from Wylan, given he's the character who's closest in frame and size to Kuwei, which makes Jesper's mistake in the book even funnier. Anyway, neither his shirt nor his waistcoat fit properly, he's probably not had a haircut in at least a year, and he's also got particularly long legs for his height, because unlike Wylan, who I feel like is probably just naturally short, Kuwei, in my head, is like a 15-year-old kid who hasn't quite hit his growth spurt properly yet, and so he's got very long legs and has become kind of gangly and disproportional, but he hasn't really broadened out to match yet. For colours, I was originally unsure, but I realised that the one other person that Kuwei might be the right size to conceivably borrow clothes from was Kaz. Would Kaz actually let him borrow any of his clothes? Almost certainly not, but by giving him a dark grey shirt that could have conceivably belonged to Kaz, I realised that if I then added orange for the waistcoat and some red on the notebook, he suddenly had this very kind of ashy, flamey sort of colour palette to him, which I thought fit him really well, given he's not only an Inferni, but also renames himself Naban after the events of the books, which means Phoenix. And I just thought it was very fitting and kind of suited him. That is, of course, all of them. I really hope you enjoyed this video. It's been a while since I did one just talking about my art progress, actually. I know my upload schedule can be a touch intermittent, but I do promise that I should actually be back soon with more videos. Not only do I have the Dunyasha fight animatic lined up that I'm working on and in progress, but I'm also hoping to make some Witcher-themed videos soon as well. Not to mention a few other animatic ideas I've been tossing around. I don't know if anyone here has listened to The Amazing Devil or The Narcissist Cookbook, but I have ideas for a few of their songs that I'd like to turn into animatics, so there should hopefully be lots more content coming up on this page soon. But that's for later, so for now, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Bye!